There is a specific kind of pain that has no name. It is not the pain of losing a stranger. It is not the pain of a broken friendship. It is not even the pain of heartbreak. At least, not the heartbreak most people understand. No. The pain I am talking about is the kind that wraps itself around your entire identity. It is the kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew about love, about family, about the people you shared blood with, the people you grew up beside, the people you called home. I know that pain. I lived inside it for longer than I care to admit. Because on one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, I came home early from work, and what I found in my own bedroom destroyed every single thing I believed in. I found my husband. And I found my sister. Together. In our bed. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I need you to understand what I mean when I say that the world does not just break in a moment like that. It evaporates. Everything you thought was solid becomes smoke. Everything you thought was certain becomes a question mark. And when I went to the people I believed would hold me, my own parents, they looked me in my eyes with a daughter standing in front of them, shaking and barely breathing, and they told me I was lying. They told me I was making it up. They told me I always hated my sister. But here's the thing about the truth. You can bury it. You can silence the person telling it. You can call her crazy, jealous, dramatic, a liar. You can close every door and draw every curtain. But the truth does not die. It waits. And when it finally reveals itself, and it always does not announce itself loudly. No, it comes quietly, softly, like a shadow stepping into the light. And everyone who refused to believe you gets to stand there and watch. This is my story. Before I go any further, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with yourself. Have you ever told someone a painful truth and been called a liar for it? Have you ever stood in a room full of people who were supposed to love you and felt completely, absolutely alone? Have you ever swallowed your pain, not because you wanted to, but because no one would listen? If you have, or if you know someone who has, then this story is for you, and I am begging you, do not scroll away, because sometimes the most healing thing a person can experience is simply knowing that someone else went through the fire and made it out the other side. So do me one favor right now. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, because what I am about to share with you today is the full, unfiltered, deeply personal truth of what happened to me. And I promise you, by the time this video is over, you are going to feel something. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. My name is not important for the purposes of this story. What matters is who I was before all of this. I was a woman who believed in love, not the fairy tale kind, the real kind. The kind that is built slowly, brick by brick, through early mornings and late nights, through arguments and reconciliations, through laughter around the dinner table and quiet evenings on the couch. I married Daniel when I was 27 years old. We had been together for 4 years before that. 4 years of building something I genuinely believed in. Daniel was not a perfect man, no one is. He had his flaws. He was sometimes withdrawn when he should have been present. He had a pride that made him slow to apologize. He could be selfish in small ways that I noticed, but always excused. But he was my husband, and I loved him deeply. In the way that you love someone when you have shared your fears with them at 2 a.m. and they did not run. In the way that you love someone when they have seen your darkest corners and stayed anyway. Or so I thought. We had a nice life. Nothing extravagant, we were not wealthy. But we had a home that was ours, a small house with a garden that I tended on weekends. We had a dog named Biscuit who slept at the foot of the bed and greeted us both with the same ridiculous enthusiasm every single evening. We had plans to travel, to eventually start a family, to grow old together in that particular gentle way that couples who genuinely like each other do. I had a career I was proud of. I worked in healthcare administration, long hours, often stressful, but meaningful. I was good at my job, my colleagues respected me. I had built something there too. And I had my family. My family. That is where this story truly begins, long before I ever opened that bedroom door. Let me tell you about my sister. I will call her Camille, because giving her a name makes this story easier to tell. Camille is 3 years younger than me, and from the very first moment I can remember, she occupied a different kind of space in our family. She was beautiful in the way that makes strangers stop and stare. She was charming in the way that made everyone feel like they were her favorite person in the room. She was funny, social, magnetic, and she knew it. She had always known it. Growing up, Camille was the one our parents bragged about at family dinners. She was the one relatives asked after first. She was the one who walked into rooms and rearranged them simply by being there. And I want to be careful here because I am not telling this story to paint myself as the tragic older sister who spent her life in jealousy. That is not the truth. The truth is more complicated than that. The truth is that I loved Camille, genuinely. She was my little sister. I had held her when she cried. I had defended her in school when other girls tried to bully her. I had stayed on the phone with her at midnight when her first boyfriend broke her heart. I had celebrated every one of her achievements with real pride. But there was also something else. Something I rarely said out loud because saying it felt disloyal. Something I mostly swallowed and told myself was my own insecurity. Camille did not always respect boundaries. Not in a dramatic, obvious way, in a subtle, creeping way. The kind of way that gaslights you into thinking you are being too sensitive. The kind of way that is very hard to articulate to other people because by itself, each incident sounds small. But when you lay them all out together, they form a pattern. She borrowed things without asking. She shared things I told her in confidence. She inserted herself into conversations and situations in ways that pushed me to the margins. She had a particular habit of making everything about her, not maliciously, or so I always told myself, but consistently. And here is the thing that I now understand looking back, that I could not see clearly then. She had always been interested in Daniel. Not openly. Not in a way I could have pointed to and said, "There, that is inappropriate." But in the small simmering way of a woman who wants something that belongs to someone else and has made peace with wanting it. I see it now, I could not see it then. Or maybe I did not want to. Before I tell you what I found that Tuesday afternoon, I need to tell you about the signs. Because there were signs. There are always signs. And the most painful part of processing a betrayal like this is not the shock of discovering it. It is the slow, agonizing rewind of your memory as you realize that the evidence was always there, and you chose in 1,000 small moments not to look directly at it. Camille had started coming around more. She had always visited occasionally, but in the year before everything fell apart, the visits increased. She would drop by on evenings when she knew I was working late. She would text Daniel directly, sometimes asking about things she could easily have texted me about. I noticed. I mentioned it to Daniel once, lightly, almost jokingly. He dismissed it, said I was being paranoid, said she was just being friendly. I believed him. There were dinners where I caught the way she laughed at his jokes, a little too fully, a little too warmly. There were moments where she touched his arm when she spoke to him, the kind of casual physical contact that hovers just at the edge of innocent. There were times when I entered a room, and a sentence ended abruptly, a pause hanging in the air. I told myself stories that made everything make sense without requiring me to face what I was actually sensing. She is just comfortable around him, he is practically her brother. She is a touchy person, that's just how she is. They always stop talking because they don't want me to feel left out of a joke, not because the joke is about me. I told myself so many stories. And Daniel, my husband, helped me tell them. He was steady, he was reassuring. He had this way of making me feel like my concerns were the problem, rather than the behaviors I was concerned about. He was patient about it, not defensive, which made it worse, actually, because patience feels like confidence, and confidence feels like innocence. It is only now that I understand what that patience actually was. It was practice. He had perfected the art of making me doubt myself. And then came the Tuesday. I was not supposed to be home. I want you to understand that. I was supposed to be at work until 6 o'clock in the evening, but my supervisor had sent us home early that day, something about a systems outage that meant we could not do anything productive. I remember being pleased about it. I remember thinking I would surprise Daniel, maybe cook something nice. I remember the drive home, the radio playing, a song I liked. The ordinary, unbothered feeling of a person who does not yet know their life is about to change. I parked in the driveway. I noticed Camille's car. That gave me a momentary pause. She had not told me she was coming, but it did not alarm me. She dropped in unannounced sometimes. I thought maybe she and Daniel were watching something together, or she had come to drop something off. I opened the front door. The house was quiet. Too quiet, actually. When two people are watching television or talking in the living room, there is a particular quality to the air, a presence. The house did not feel that way. The living room was empty. I put my bag down. I called out their names. No answer. And that was when something animal in me, something underneath thought and reason, knew. Before I took a single step, before I walked down the hallway, before I reached the bedroom door, something in me already knew. And every step I took toward that door was a step toward confirming the thing my body already understood. I opened the door. And there they were. My husband. And my sister. In our bed. I want to tell you that I screamed, or that I said something powerful, something that expressed the full enormity of what I was feeling, but I did not. I did not make a single sound. I stood there. For how long I genuinely cannot tell you, and I looked at them, and when they saw me, the look on their faces was something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Camille looked like a child who had been caught stealing. Shame and fear and a strange pathetic attempt to cover herself that I found in that moment absolutely surreal. Daniel looked like a man whose whole performance had finally collapsed. All that patience, all those reassurances, all those carefully maintained denials, gone. Just a man in a bed where he should not have been, staring at his wife who now knew everything. I did not say a word. I turned around. I picked up my bag from where I had left it in the hallway. I walked out of the front door. I got in my car. And I drove. I do not know how long I drove. I do not remember which roads I took. There is a specific kind of shock that does not look like what people expect shock to look like. It is not screaming. It is not hyperventilating. It is a profound, all-encompassing silence, both outside you and inside you. My phone started ringing almost immediately. First Daniel, then Camille, then Daniel again. I watched the screen light up and I felt nothing. I felt a kind of vast, hollow nothing that was somehow both peaceful and terrifying. I pulled over eventually in the parking lot of a supermarket. I sat in my car and I looked at the ordinary people walking in and out with their ordinary shopping bags, living their ordinary lives, and I thought, how strange. The world is still going. Right now, at this very moment, people are buying milk and bread and choosing between brands of cereal, and inside my chest, everything is in ruins. I want to talk for a moment about what you do with your hands when your world is collapsing. This sounds like a strange thing to focus on, but it is the thing I remember most clearly. I did not know what to do with my hands. They felt foreign to my body. I pressed them flat on my thighs, and then I moved them to the steering wheel, and then I pressed them together in my lap, just looking for something to hold. I did not cry, not yet. There is a period in the immediate aftermath of catastrophic news where the tears have not arrived yet, because the brain is still trying to process what just happened. Like a computer that has received too much data at once and needs a moment before it can produce an output. After some time, I knew I needed to go somewhere. I needed to be around people who loved me. People who would hold me and let me fall apart and help me figure out what came next. I called my mother. This is the part of the story that even now is the hardest to tell, because what Daniel and Camille did to me, as devastating as it was still something I could eventually put in a box labeled, "People can be terrible, and sometimes the people we love are those people." That box is painful, but it is a box that exists. I know other people who have had to carry it. What happened with my parents, however, was something different. Something that lives in a category of its own. I drove to my parents' house. I remember sitting in their driveway for a moment, composing myself as best I could. Then I went inside. My mother was in the kitchen, my father was in the living room. I sat them both down, and with as much steadiness as I could manage, I told them what I had come home to find. I told them about Daniel, about Camille, about walking into that bedroom, about leaving without a word. I told them everything. I watched their faces as I spoke. And what I saw there, I cannot fully describe it to you. It was not shock, it was not horror, it was not the instinctive protective outrage of parents whose child has just been catastrophically betrayed. It was something else, something more careful, more guarded. And then my father spoke. He said, "Are you sure about what you saw?" I want you to sit with that question. Are you sure about what you saw? I looked at my father, the man who had walked me to school on my first day, the man who had dried my tears, the man who had always told me, growing up, that family was everything, that family was the one thing you could always count on. I looked at him and I said, yes, I was absolutely sure. My mother looked down at the table. That look, the avoidance of eye contact from a mother when her child is in pain, is something I will never fully recover from. She said, "Sweetheart, you've always had a difficult relationship with your sister. Could you be misreading the situation? Could you be misreading the situation?" I stared at her. I walked into my bedroom. They were in the bed, my bed. There was no misreading anything. And then came the words that cut deepest, the ones that still ring in my ears on quiet nights when the memories circle back. My father leaned forward and he said, "You know how you can get. You've always looked for reasons to think the worst of Camille. From when you were children, you've always resented her a little, and that's not a criticism, it's natural between siblings. But I don't think we can take this at face value without speaking to Camille first." There it was. There it was. In my worst moment, the worst moment of my adult life, my parents chose to protect Camille's reputation over my pain. They took the evidence of my own eyes and filtered it through 30 years of a family narrative that had already decided who the credible one was, who the dramatic one was, who the golden child was, and who the other one was. And I sat there in that kitchen, shaking, and I realized something devastating. This was not new. This had always been true. I had just never needed it to matter this much before. I want to slow down here and speak very directly to anyone watching who has ever experienced something similar. Because what happened to me in that kitchen has a name, and it is important to call it what it is. When the people who are supposed to be your safe harbor, your parents, your closest family, respond to your pain by questioning your perception of reality, that is a form of betrayal that is uniquely devastating, because it is not just, "I don't believe you." It is, "I have decided that my comfort, my family image, my preferred version of events is more important than your experience of what actually happened." It tells you, in the clearest possible language, your truth is less important than our peace. And because I had grown up in this family, because I had spent a lifetime being the one who was sometimes difficult, sometimes too sensitive, sometimes getting worked up over nothing, the gaslighting hit ground that had already been prepared for it. It found soil. I left my parents' house that evening feeling something I had never felt before, and hope never to feel again. I felt completely, utterly invisible. Not just unloved, invisible. Like I had never really existed in my own right. Like I was only ever a supporting character in Camille's story. And when I tried to step into the center of my own narrative, the whole family cast recoiled. I went to a friend's house. I will call her Maya. Maya is one of those rare people who exists in the world like a lighthouse. When everything is chaos, she is simply, steadily there. I arrived at Maya's door at 8 o'clock at night, and when she opened it and saw my face, she did not ask a single question. She just opened the door wider and stepped aside and let me in. And then I cried. For the first time since I had walked into that bedroom, I cried. I cried for a long, long time. I stayed with Maya for the first 2 weeks. I could not go back to the house, not yet. The thought of walking back into that bedroom, even just to collect my things, made my body physically revolt. Maya went with me, eventually. She packed a bag for me. She was matter-of-fact about it in the way that truly good friends are. Efficient, practical. Daniel called. He texted. He sent emails. The messages shifted over time in the way that these messages always do. First came the immediate panic. Please just talk to me. Then came the justifications. He was not happy. Things between us had been difficult. He had not planned for this to happen. Then came something that tried to be remorse. I am so sorry, I know how this looks. I never wanted to hurt you. Then came something uglier. You drove me to this. You were always so suspicious, so difficult. You made me feel like I could not breathe. I read them all. I responded to none of them. Because here is what I had learned in the first devastating weeks of solitude and honest reflection. I had spent years making space for other people's comfort at the expense of my own truth. I had excused, overlooked, rationalized, and minimized. And the silence I chose after walking out of that bedroom was the first truly uncurated thing I had done in a long time. I was not going to perform my pain for the person who caused it. Camille did not reach out for several days. When she finally did, it was a text message. I have thought about this text many times. It said, I know there's nothing I can say, I'm sorry, I hope someday you'll let me explain. Let me explain. As though there was an explanation that would rearrange what I had seen. As though the right combination of words could make any of it make sense. I did not respond. My parents called regularly. The conversations were difficult. They had clearly spoken to Camille. The narrative had been shaped without me, and I could hear it in the careful, diplomatic way my mother spoke, trying to hold space for everyone, which meant holding full space for no one, least of all me. My father was more direct. He said he was not choosing sides. He said he hoped I would be open to hearing all perspectives. He said the family needed to heal. The family needed to heal. Not. His daughter had been betrayed in the most intimate possible way and deserved rage on her behalf. Not. There are no sides here, only a wrong that was done and a person who was wronged. Just, the family needs to heal. Everyone's perspectives matter. Let us all come together. I want to tell you something important. There is a version of healing that families perform when one of their members has done something truly unforgivable. It is a kind of collective amnesia dressed in the language of forgiveness and peace. It asks the person who was hurt to absorb the wound quietly so that everyone else can return to comfort. It rewards the wrongdoer with the mercy of being quickly forgotten, and it asks the victim to be grateful for that mercy, to call it healing rather than erasure. I refused to call it healing, and in refusing, I became the problem. I want to take a moment to talk about what the healing process actually looked like for me, not the performed kind, but the real kind. I found a therapist. Her name is not important, but she was the right fit. Direct, warm, with a gift for asking the questions that pulled things into light rather than pushing them further underground. I want to be honest about therapy because I think there is sometimes a romanticized version of it in these kinds of stories. It was not easy. There were sessions where I left feeling worse than when I went in, because real therapy does not let you stay comfortable. It requires you to look at the whole picture, including the parts that are about you. What I found in those sessions was that some of the pain I was carrying had roots that went far deeper than that Tuesday afternoon. That my patterns of minimizing and accommodating, of shrinking to make space for others, had a long history. That I had spent years being a certain version of myself in my marriage and in my family that was not entirely authentic, not because anyone had forced me to be, but because I had learned very early that the authentic version of me required more negotiation. I also found something else in those sessions. I found that I was angrier than I knew. That underneath the sadness and the grief and the disbelief was a fury that was clean and righteous and entirely mine. And my therapist helped me understand that fury was not something to be afraid of. Anger, she told me, is often just love that has been met with betrayal. It is proof that something mattered to you, and she was right. I started exercising, not in the punishing, self-destructive way that sometimes comes with grief, but in the deliberate, reclaiming way of a person who wants to re-inhabit their own body. I started cooking for myself. Not the meals I had cooked to please Daniel, but the meals I actually loved. The ones he found too spicy or too unusual. Spicy, unusual meals, eaten alone at my small kitchen table in the apartment I had rented, became one of the unexpected pleasures of rebuilding. I leaned on Maya. I made new friends, slowly, through a book group she invited me to. I rediscovered interests that had gotten buried under years of coupledom. I had loved photography once, as a teenager, and I started again, walking early in the mornings with a camera around my neck, finding the beauty in ordinary things. It was not linear, nothing like this is. There were terrible days tucked inside improving weeks. There were mornings I woke up, and the first thought was still the bedroom, still their faces, still the particular quality of my parents' carefully neutral expressions. But the terrible days grew fewer, and the other kind grew more. I was making my way. Slowly, quietly, stubbornly, I was making my way. The divorce was not a dramatic battle. I had expected it to be. I had braced for it. But the truth was that Daniel knew, in the deepest part of himself, that he had no moral ground to stand on. Our solicitor facilitated a settlement that was fair and concluded without courtroom drama. During the process, I learned things, the way you always do in a divorce. When the formality of the proceedings pulls back the curtain on a life you thought you were sharing and reveals the parts that were hidden. Daniel had been in contact with Camille for longer than I had known, much longer. What I had stumbled into was not an impulse or a mistake born from a single moment of weakness. It had been ongoing. How long exactly, I genuinely do not know, and I made a decision at some point to stop trying to trace the exact timeline, because I realized it did not change anything. The wound was the same depth regardless of when it had first been made. There is a specific kind of grief that comes with this realization, because when something has been going on for a long time, it retroactively reaches back and colors the memories you thought were good ones. You start to think, that holiday we took, was he already in contact with her then? That anniversary dinner where he was so affectionate, was there guilt in that? That night we talked until 3 a.m. about our future together. Was any of it real? This is, I think, one of the most insidious aspects of prolonged betrayal. It does not just steal your present, it steals your past. My therapist helped me hold this carefully. She helped me understand that I did not have to retroactively void every good memory in order to acknowledge the betrayal. That real moments of connection can exist alongside a lie. That both things can be true. It was difficult logic to fully absorb, but I am still working on it. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday morning. I signed the last documents in a quiet office, and then I went to a coffee shop by myself and sat in the window and ordered a large cup of coffee and a piece of cake that I absolutely did not need, but absolutely ate. And I felt something I had not expected to feel in that moment. I felt relief. Not happiness, not celebration, but relief. The weight of that marriage, and I had not fully understood what a weight it had been until I was no longer carrying it, was gone. I was free. My relationship with my parents changed after everything. I want to be honest about that because I think in these kinds of stories, there is sometimes a pressure to arrive quickly at forgiveness or reconciliation, and to present that as the triumph. But real life is messier than that. For a long time, I kept my parents at a careful distance. Not out of cruelty, I still loved them, and that love did not evaporate because of their failure, but because I recognized for the first time the limits of what they were capable of giving me, and continuing to show up and expect something from them that they had demonstrated they could not provide, would only have perpetuated my own suffering. My father eventually made some effort. He called one day, months after the divorce, and said something I had not expected. He said he had been thinking. He said he should have listened to me that night. He said he was sorry that he had not. He did not say everything perfectly, and he did not entirely relinquish his need to be careful with Camille, but it was something. It was a man who found it hard to admit being wrong, admitting it partially. I received it as what it was, imperfect but real. My mother was slower. Her relationship with Camille had always been the deepest one in the family. The bond between them was something I had spent my childhood watching from the outside. Challenging that bond meant challenging a central part of her identity. But mothers, even when they fail us, often find their way back when given enough time and enough silence to think. With Camille, it has been the longest road, the most complicated terrain. Because here is the truth, she is still my sister. She was my sister before she was the woman I found in my bed with my husband. She will be my sister for the rest of my life, regardless of what she did. Blood is not a bond you can simply sever, even when you would sometimes like to. But I also need to be honest about this. Some betrayals change the nature of a relationship forever. They do not make it impossible to have a relationship, but they make the relationship a different one than it was before. Less certain, more guarded, smaller in some essential way. Camille and I are not close. Maybe we never will be again, not in the way we once were. She has, from what I understand, struggled significantly in the years since, and I want to be very careful about how I say what comes next, because I am not someone who finds joy in the suffering of others, even others who have hurt me deeply. But I do believe in consequences, and I do believe that the universe tends, in the long run, toward a kind of accounting. What happened, what revealed itself quietly, slowly, in the time after, was not dramatic. There was no single moment of comeuppance, no explosion, no confrontation, no scene. It was subtler than that. I need you to understand something before I tell you this part. I did not want revenge. I want to be very clear about that. There is a version of this story where the wronged woman schemes and plots and engineers a downfall. That is not my story. I was too tired for revenge. I was too busy rebuilding my life to spend energy destroying someone else's. But the truth, as I said at the beginning of this video, does not die, and it does not require your help. It came out, as it always does. Camille and Daniel did not last. I learned this not from them, but from a cousin who mentioned it in passing. The casual, slightly uncomfortable way people mention things they are not sure you want to know. Daniel apparently continued being Daniel, the same patterns, the same talent for making someone feel chosen, right up until they were not chosen anymore. The same restlessness, the same carefully maintained performance of a devoted partner behind which lived a man who could not be still. The irony, and I say this with no pleasure, only recognition, is that Camille got to experience firsthand what she had helped create. She understood, eventually and intimately, what it felt like to be the woman who was not enough to hold him. I felt nothing triumphant when I learned this. I want to be clear about that too. I felt sad, actually. Not for Daniel, but for Camille. Because despite everything she had done, she was still in some locked room of my heart, my little sister. The girl I had carried on my back in the playground. The girl I had stayed on the phone with at midnight. And the sadness I felt was for the version of her that still existed in that room. The one from before any of this. But here is what justice actually looked like for me. It was not their reckoning, it was mine. Justice was the morning I woke up in my own apartment and felt, for the first time in months, genuinely peaceful. Justice was the day I was promoted at work, a recognition that had been in process during the worst of it, that arrived like a signal from the universe that the part of me I had not let them take was intact and thriving. Justice was the book group, and the camera and the spicy food and the long morning walks. Justice was Maya, and the other friends I found in the clearing that grief opens up when it finally passes through. Justice was the relationship I have now, careful, slow, built on an entirely different kind of foundation, with someone who has never once made me doubt what I see with my own eyes. And perhaps most quietly, most importantly, justice was the conversation I had with my parents, more than a year after everything, when we finally spoke honestly about what had happened. Not just about Daniel and Camille, but about the longer history, about the ways the family dynamics had been set in patterns that served some of us more than others. It was not a perfect conversation. It did not resolve everything, but it was honest. For the first time in as long as I could remember, it was truly honest. Justice is not always loud. That is what this experience taught me most profoundly. It does not always arrive with fireworks and vindication, and a moment where you get to stand tall while the people who wronged you are forced to watch. Sometimes justice is just the quiet, undeniable fact of your own survival, your own growth, your own continued, stubborn, magnificent existence in a life that is finally, fully yours. I am coming to the end of this story, and I want to spend a few moments with you before I go, because I started this video by asking you a question, and I want to honor that. If you have ever told the truth and been called a liar, I want you to hear this. Being believed is not what makes your truth true. The truth exists independently of whether the people you tell it to are willing to receive it. You can be completely right and completely disbelieved simultaneously, and the disbelief does not touch the truth. It never has. If you have ever been the person in a family who was assigned a role, the difficult one, the dramatic one, the jealous one, the one who always makes things complicated, I want you to hear this. Those roles are assigned to serve the comfort of the people who assign them. They have nothing to do with who you actually are, and one of the most profound acts of self-reclamation available to you is to simply refuse to keep playing the part. If you have ever watched a family circle, the wagons around the person who hurt you, rather than around you, I want you to hear this. That is one of the most painful things a human being can experience, and your pain is valid, and you are not obligated to shrink that pain to protect the people who failed to protect you. And if you are somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, if you are in the part of the story that is still chaos, still hurt, still disbelief, I want you to hear this most of all. The story is not over. Your part in it is not over. The part where you find your footing, build your life, and discover that you are more resilient than you knew, that part is coming. It may not look exactly like mine. It will be your own shape, your own timeline, but it is coming. The truth always finds the light eventually. And so do you. Before you go, I need to say something to you. You just sat with me through one of the most painful chapters of my life. You heard the whole story, the bedroom door, the silence in the car, my father's words across the kitchen table, the long and uneven process of becoming whole again. You showed up for this story, and that means something to me. So I'm going to ask you to do something, not for me, for the next person who finds this video. Because somewhere out there right now, and I believe this with everything in me, there is someone who feels exactly the way I felt that night when I sat down at my parents' kitchen table. Shaking, disbelieved, invisible. They are searching for something. Maybe they do not even know exactly what they are searching for. Maybe they just need to find a voice that says, "This happened to me too and I survived it." This video might be the thing they find. So if this story moved you, if it reached something in you, please share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. Put it on your page. Leave a comment below, even just one word that tells me you were here, that you listened, that you witnessed this story. Because witnessing matters. Being seen matters. And if you have not already, subscribe to this channel, because I am not done talking. There is more story to tell, more ground to cover, more hard-earned wisdom I want to put into the world, and I want you here for it. Hit the notification bell, leave a comment, share this with someone who needs it. Because you never know whose Tuesday afternoon this might reach. You never know whose hand you might be steadying, just by sending a video, just by saying, "You need to watch this." You matter to this story, you always did. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourselves. And remember, the truth always finds the light. Always.